When reading interviews with Truman Capote, or even listening to him speak, you get the idea that he is lying to you. There's a kind of impermeability to his words. Of course, when confronted with the idea of Capote, there is already a lot of baggage. Hundreds of pages of criticism have been written and rewritten on his prose. Interviews have poked and prodded at him for decades, trying to really understand who Capote was. And from this immense amount of speculation comes an ironic amount of confusion. This dichotomy is a fascinating one. George Plimpton, in his biography of Capote, recollects a conversation with John Knowles in which he says, "There are only two American writers who are recognized by the man on the street in this century, Truman and Ernest Hemingway." This isn't true, but it is a fascinatingly powerful opinion. Hemingway and Capote are both men of popular dichotomy. Hemingway was a genius of clear, poignant style, but also a misogynist and abusive partner. Capote was said to be both the life of the party and insufferable. He is a backstabbing fiend of high society gossip, but also the person you had coffee with every Wednesday. They both were alcoholics, manic stars of 1960s fame, but also brilliant and talented writers. And with stardom, in any form, comes a kind of mysticism. Imperfections are hidden or flat out denied until their death. So it is strange when, in one of his last chapters of his book Music for Chameleons, Capote wrote one of his most famous lines ever. "I'm not a saint yet. I'm an alcoholic. I'm a drug addict. I'm homosexual. I'm a genius." Truman Capote taught himself to read. By his own admission, he could read by the time he was 4 years old, which also meant that he was unable to recite the alphabet in order, even into his adulthood. Or at least, he says so. By the time he was in school, he would come home and write for hours like it was a hobby. We don't know whether that is true or not either. How could we? But we do know one thing. Capote could write. By the time he was about to graduate college, he had already written multiple short stories that won various awards, including The Walls Are Cold in 1943, The Shape of Things in 1944, and his horror short, Miriam, in 1945, which won the O. Henry Award in the category Best First Published Story. This attracted the attention of Random House, which agreed to publish Capote's first novel, Other Voices, Other Rooms. Capote was 23 at the time, and was about to become a star. Other Voices, Other Rooms follows Joel, a young, shy boy who is called to live with his father in a rotting mansion on the outskirts of a town far away in the south. The tale borrows from what made Miriam great, which was its gothic and haunting themes mixed with rich characterization. There he meets Idabel, a tomboyish town terror that eventually befriends him. But as he reaches his house, he has a horrific realization. His father, the one who forced him to move to the Deep South, is catatonic. He cannot speak or move, due to be accidentally shot by his cousin Randolph, a man who owns the mansion and who also becomes a friend to Joel. Other Voices, Other Rooms is an intricate weave of sexual symbolism, written at a time of complete independence, and is therefore semi-autobiographical. The paralyzation of his father symbolizes how divided Capote felt from his own parent, who divorced his mother at a young age. The whole story, his father is only able to communicate in 2 sentences. Good boy, and the last thing that Joel hears before leaving him. Bad boy. The whole story culminates in an almost surrealist zeal, a beautiful typhoon of emotions, fears, and in the end, acceptance, guided by the benevolent spirit of Randolph, who has symbolically defeated his oppressive father's influence by shooting him. Both Joel and Idabel struggle together with their sexuality, their place in a world convinced that they should be something else, and the neglect or absence of their only blood relations. This book immediately made him famous, and paved the way for his next 2 achievements, The Grass Harp in 1956, and Breakfast at Tiffany's in 1958. And this is where we have to talk about Capote's style. Hemingway was praised for his simple, straight-to-the-point prose and cryptic dialogue, so different from his American contemporaries of the time. Capote was a different kind of writer, though, and one thing you particularly notice when reading his late 1950 to 1960s work is his addiction to characters. I went out in the hall and leaned over the banister, just enough to see without being seen. She was still on the stairs. Now she reached the landing, and the rag-bag colors of her boy's hair, tawny streaks, strands of albino blonde and yellow, caught the hall light. It was a warm evening, nearly summer, and she wore a slim, cool black dress, black sandals, a pearl choker. For all her chic thinness, she had an almost breakfast cereal air of health, a soap and lemon cleanness, a rough pink darkening in the cheeks. Her mouth was large, her nose upturned. A pair of dark glasses blotted out her eyes. It was a face beyond childhood, yet this side of belonging to a woman. I thought her anywhere between 16 and 30. As it turned out, she was shy 2 months of her 19th birthday. She was not alone. There was a man following behind her. The way his plump hand clutched at her hip seemed somehow improper, not morally, aesthetically. He was short and vast, sun-lamped and pomaded, a man in a buttressed pinstripe suit with a red carnation withering in the lapel. When they reached the door, she rummaged her purse in search of a key, and took no notice of the fact that his thick lips were nuzzling the nape of her neck. At last, though, finding the key and opening the door, she turned to him cordially. "Bless you, darling, you were sweet to see me home." "Hey, baby," he said, for the door was closing in his face. "Yes, Harry?" "Harry was the other guy. I'm Sid Arbuck. You like me." "I worship you, Mr. Arbuck, but good night, Mr. Arbuck." Mr. Arbuck stared with disbelief as the door shut firmly. "Hey, baby, let me in, baby. You like me, baby. I'm a liked guy. Didn't I pick up the check? 5 people, your friends? I never seen them before. Don't that give me the right you should like me? You like me, baby." He tapped on the door gently, then louder. Finally, he took several steps back, his body hunched and lowering, as though he meant to charge it, crash it down. Instead, he plunged down the stairs, slamming a fist against the wall. Just as he reached the bottom, the door of the girl's apartment opened, and she poked out her head. "Oh, Mr. Arbuck." He turned back, a smile of relief oiling his face. She had only been teasing. "The next time a girl wants a little powder room change," she called, not teasing at all, "take my advice, darling. Don't give her 20 cents. Capote sees people in a different way, and this is especially apparent in the way he writes women, especially in contrast to the other male writers of the 60s. This is not to say he was particularly a feminist writer. Following his dichotomy, he is quoted as saying that of course women should have the right to abortion, but they shouldn't have the right to be paid the same. But it's notable that the women in all of his later novels are just handled with an incredible amount of loving detail. The Grass Harp takes this even further, examining the loving relationship between yet another young, effeminate boy and 2 elderly women as they are forced out of their house by the surrounding gossip of the town and made to live together in a small treehouse. Not only are the elderly friends described with the same burnished affection as the fictional Hollywood models, but so too is the landscape. When was it, the first time I heard of the Grass Harp? Long before the autumn we lived in the China Tree, an earlier autumn then, and of course it was Dolly who told me. No one else would have known to call it that, a grass harp. If on leaving town you take the church road, you soon will pass a glaring hill of bone-white slabs and brown burnt flowers. This is the Baptist cemetery. Our people, Talbos, Fenwicks, are buried there. My mother lies next to my father, and the graves of kinfolk, 20 or more, are around them like the prone roots of a stony tree. Below the hill grows a field of high Indian grass that changes color with the seasons. Go to see it in the fall, late September, when it has gone red as sunset, when scarlet shadows like firelight breeze over it and the autumn winds strum on its dry leaves, sighing human music. A harp of voices. To Capote, even the earth is a character. But before we talk about the book everyone is thinking about right now, let's jump ahead. Capote's last planned novel, Answered Prayers, was never fully finished as far as we can tell. It was, however, a collection of different stories that were real. Not literally real, but literarily real. Capote had made many tenuous alliances in his search for fame. He was always accompanied by one woman or another, a collection of rich and powerful swans. These women would often talk about Capote in good light, commenting about his brilliant nature, how interesting and fierce he was in conversation. But that conversation also included private conversation, and Capote was perhaps not as trustworthy as they thought, with secrets. La Côte Basque, a section of Answered Prayers, is a pre-published chapter of the unfinished work, and it betrayed them. In it, he revealed secrets of the woman's infidelity. The novel suggests that actress Anne Woodward purposefully shot her husband, instead of it being an accident like she claimed. And the women that had trusted Capote, despite his little lies and exaggerated persona, turned back on him. In response to this, Capote has yet another famous line. All literature is gossip. Well, let's keep that in mind as we continue. And now we have the big one, the one the movie was about, the one that may or may not have invented a genre. The village of Holcomb stands on the high wheat plains of western Kansas, a lonesome area that other Kansans call out there. Some 17 miles east of the Colorado border, the countryside with its hard blue skies and desert-clear air has an atmosphere that is rather more far west than Middle West. The local accent is barbed with a prairie twang, a ranch hand nasalness, and the men, many of them, wear narrow frontier trousers, Stetsons, and high-heeled boots with pointed toes. The land is flat, and the views are awesomely extensive. Horses, herds of cattle, a white cluster of grain elevators rising as gracefully as Greek temples are visible long before a traveler reaches them. The character, too, is as strong as ever. Despite the reality of the Holcomb tragedy, Capote breathes life into the dead. Always certain of what he wanted from the world, Mr. Clutter had in large measure obtained it. On his left hand, on what remained of a finger once mangled by a piece of farm machinery, he wore a plain gold band, which was the symbol, a quarter-century old, of his marriage to the person he had wished to marry, the sister of a college classmate, a timid, pious, delicate girl named Bonnie Fox, who was 3 years younger than he. She had given him 4 children, a trio of daughters, then a son. The eldest daughter, Eviana, married, and the mother of a boy 9 months old, lived in northern Illinois, but visited Holcomb frequently. Indeed, she and her family were expected within the fortnight, for her parents planned a sizable Thanksgiving reunion of the Clutter clan. Normally, Nancy would willingly have taught Jolene to prepare an entire turkey dinner. She felt it her duty to become available when younger girls came to her wanting help with their cooking, their sewing, or their music lessons, or as often happened to confide, where she found the time and still managed to practically run that big house and be a straight-A student, the president of her class, a leader in the 4-H program and the Young Methodist League, a skilled writer, an excellent musician, piano, clarinet, an annual winner at the county fair, pastry, preserves, needlework, flower arrangement. How a girl not yet 17 could haul such a wagon load and do so without brag, with rather merely a radiant jauntiness, was an enigma the community pondered, and solved by saying, "She's got character. Gets it from her old man." Certainly her strongest trait, the talent that gave support to all the others, derived from her father, a fine-honed sense of organization. On November 15th, 1959, the Clutter family was murdered. Both the 2 parents, Herbert and Bonnie, and their 2 youngest children, Kenyon and Nancy, the only ones still living at home. And Capote, who at this point was well established in his position of cosmopolitan fiction, theater, and journalism, decided to write something revolutionary, a novel that was, actually, openly true. At least, that's what Capote would say. But this is another kind of lie. It is true that Capote's novel was different. It adhered incredibly closely to the facts. Multiple friends helped him collect data on the murders. He was even given interviews with the killers, personally prolonging their trial by funding their defense. But true crime novels had existed for centuries before this. Even books very close to Capote's time were pretty much the same thing, like Meyer Levin's 1956 bestseller, Compulsion. But Capote's was different, because not only did he not change the names of the people, but he brought his addiction to character to even the killers. Like Mr. Clutter, the young man breakfasting in a cafe called the Little Jewel never drank coffee. He preferred root beer, 3 aspirin, cold root beer, and a chain of Pall Mall cigarettes. That was his notion of a proper chow-down. Sipping and smoking, he studied a map spread on the counter before him, a Phillips 66 map of Mexico. But it was difficult to concentrate, for he was expecting a friend, and the friend was late. He looked out of the window at the silent, small-town street, a street he had never seen until yesterday. Still no sign of Dick, but he was sure to show up. After all, the purpose of their meeting was Dick's idea, his score, and when it was settled, Mexico. The map was ragged, so thumbed that it had grown as supple as a piece of chamois. Around the corner, in his room at the hotel where he was staying, were hundreds more like it, worn maps of every state in the Union, every Canadian province, every South American country. For the young man was an incessant conceiver of voyages, not a few of which he had actually taken, to Alaska, to Hawaii and Japan, to Hong Kong. Now, thanks to a letter, an invitation to a score. The way Capote describes Perry Smith in Cold Blood has been torn apart by critics, and we must admit when engaging with this text that it is possible that Truman Capote was in love with one of the killers. Richard Hickok is certainly treated differently by the novel, and this is where Capote's complexity bursts through our vision of him. How could a man who wrote scathingly of the high society socialites he lived with every day also write a murderer sympathetically? We don't know, but many articles and tabloids will tell you that writing in cold blood ruined Capote. Perry, during the last days before his execution by hanging, left all of his things to Truman. The famous journalist was supposed to spend his final day with him, but in the end could only bring himself to show up right before the scheduled time. As the lever was dropped and Perry was hanged, it took over 10 minutes for him to die. Hickok, who had been first, had taken almost 20. Capote was there for it all. It is hard to say, really, whether Truman Capote was a genius. But there is one more piece of the puzzle. Truman Capote died on August 25, 1984, of liver failure. This was a fate many could see coming. Despite saying multiple times throughout his life that he had quit drugs and drinking, the rest of the world knew that that too was one of Capote's exaggerations. But 2 years before that, he published his last short story, titled One Christmas. The title is close to another of his autobiographical stories, A Christmas Memory, where he relates a story of the time he spent making pies with his best friend during the holidays, Sook, his elderly cousin. It's a happy story. But One Christmas is different. It relates a time when he visited one of his old characters, his father. In the story, another young, effeminate boy travels to New Orleans, forced to spend time with a father that is a fierce alcoholic. The child clearly resents him a little, if not a lot, but the father tries to relate to his semi-abandoned son. The child sees a large, expensive toy plane in his store window, the one so large a child could actually ride in them. Late on Christmas Eve, the father tries incredibly hard, decorating, celebrating, filling the tree with presents, and then comes Christmas Day. All of the presents under the tree say, "From Santa to Buddy." I decided to open the packages. It was Christmas morning, I was awake, so why not? I won't bother to describe what was inside them, just shirts and sweaters and dull stuff like that. The only thing I appreciated was a quite snazzy cap pistol. Somehow I got the idea it would be fun to waken my father by firing it. So I did. Bang, bang, bang! He raced out of his room wild-eyed. Bang, bang, bang! Buddy, what the hell do you think you're doing? Bang, bang, bang! Stop that! I laughed. Look, Daddy, look at all the wonderful things Santa Claus brought me. Calm now. He walked into the parlor and hugged me. You like what Santa Claus brought you? I smiled at him. He smiled at me. There was a tender, lingering moment, shattered, when I said, Yes, but what are you going to give me, Daddy? But the father recovers. He can still do this. Well, I thought I'd wait to let you pick out something you wanted. Is there anything particular you want? I reminded him of the airplane we had seen in the toy store on Canal Street. His face sagged. Oh yes, he remembered the airplane and how expensive it was. Nevertheless, the next day I was sitting in that airplane, dreaming I was zooming toward heaven, while my father wrote out a check for a happy salesman. But I wasn't free of New Orleans yet. The problem was a large silver flask of moonshine. Maybe it was because of my departure, but anyway, my father had been swilling it all day, and on the way to the bus station, he scared me by grabbing my wrist and harshly whispering, "I'm not going to let you go. I can't let you go to that crazy family in that crazy old house. Just look at what they've done to you. A boy, 6, almost 7, talking about Santa Claus? It's all their fault. All those sour old spinsters with their Bibles and their knitting needles. Those drunken uncles. Listen to me, buddy. There is no God. There is no Santa Claus." He was squeezing my wrist so hard that it ached. Sometimes, oh God, I think your mother and I, the both of us, we have to kill ourselves to let that happen. He never killed himself, but my mother did. She walked down the second road 30 years ago. "Kiss me. Please, please kiss me. Tell your daddy that you love him." But I couldn't speak. I was terrified I was going to miss my bus, and I was worried about my plane, which was strapped to the top of the taxi. "Say it. I love you. Say it. Please, buddy. Say it." But he doesn't say it. In terror, the boy runs into the cab, leaving his drunk father sad and alone in the streets of New Orleans. Capote's real mother really did walk that second road in 1954. Capote was 29. But as he returns home to live with Sook, whose name isn't even changed in the story, the pain doesn't go away. He talks to his elderly friend who comforts him, like the child he is, or was. Of course there's a Santa Claus. It's just no single somebody could do all that he has to do. So the Lord has spread the task among us all. That's why everybody is Santa Claus. I am, you are, even your cousin Billy Bob. Now go to sleep, count stars. Think of the quietest thing, like snow. I'm sorry you didn't get to see any, but now snow is falling through the stars. Stars sparkled. Snow whirled inside my head. The last thing I remembered was the peaceful voice of the Lord, telling me something I must do. And the next day, I did it. I went with Sook to the post office and bought a penny postcard. That same postcard exists today. It was found in my father's safety deposit box when he died last year. Here is what I had written him. "Hello, Pop. Hope you are well. I am, and I am learning to pedal my plane so fast I will soon be in the sky. So keep your eyes open. And yes, I love you. Buddy." That is not gossip. Another lie, Mr. Capote. But this lie is one we can derive the truth from. Because Capote knew that all literature wasn't gossip. No, literature was something else to him. To Capote, all literature is about real people. Real characters. Remember Other Voices, Other Rooms, the story he wrote when he was just 23 with the absent father. Idabel, the tomboy that struggles with Capote through sexuality, is based primarily on Harper Lee, Capote's other childhood friend and the author of To Kill a Mockingbird. Randolph, the homosexual man who shot his father on accident and in the end cares for Joel, is based loosely on Capote's fatherly old cousin, Bud Falk. Miss Holly Golightly, the woman being described in that first passage I shared from Breakfast at Tiffany's, is based off of, well, it's hard to say, but Capote was threatened with a lawsuit by Bonnie Golightly for using her likeness in his story. James Michener, in his foreword to Lawrence Grobel's book, Conversations with Capote, says that that was absurd and that he knew the woman who it was actually based off of, and she was, quote, a tall model from Montana. To this, Capote is reported as telling him that he was worried that she would sue him too. Dolly Talbot, from the Grass Harp, is based off of the same woman in One Christmas, Sook Falk. So we have a reckoning. Through drug addiction, through alcohol abuse, through treating people you previously cared for as gossip, Capote, just like he said, was no saint. Quite the opposite. He was a devil among devils, but a devil who dedicated himself to looking at people through words. And then, at the end, even the facade of aliases was lifted. In Cold Blood, the Christmas stories, all have characters that literally lived and breathed. And to be able to put that onto a page, to teach yourself to read, to capture who other people were, who you were, the people you secretly hated, and the people you secretly loved. To emblazon in a text the characters that beforehand we could only catch glimpses of in old paparazzi pictures or obituaries, and to redefine a genre of literature with their captured images. That's pretty genius.